Anyway, so you know a little bit about me. Moved to Lynchburg about 7 years ago. I practiced in Seattle for 10 years before that. Yes, big change, Seattle to Lynchburg, which is why I'm practicing mindfulness. No, so today we're going to talk about the mindfulness and the science of happiness, and our objectives of the session are to introduce the core concepts of mindfulness, discuss the science of happiness, and describes tools that can be used to increase authentic happiness in work and in life. There will be a test at the end, so please take notes. It's a little stressful. So who's practicing mindfulness? So when I first got into mindfulness several years ago, my perception of mindfulness was sitting quietly, meditating, clearing your mind, drawing happy little trees, didn't really fit in with my persona, which is more of a kind of a crass, sometimes impatient, fast-moving ER physician. But when you look at who's practicing mindfulness nowadays, it's people like Silicon Valley entrepreneurs, Fortune 500 CEOs, Pentagon chiefs, Marines, and titans of the finance industry. So mindfulness has grown and spread in many aspects of society and has become a very successful way for dealing with stress. And so, we all have stress in our lives. There's good stress and bad stress. You can think of work schedules, how many patients you need to see per hour, financial stress, family stress, all different kinds of stresses. In the emergency department, you can imagine we have a lot of stress that we deal with. I often feel like Betty when I work there. I'm in urgent care most of the time now, but it says, pull out, Betty, pull out, you hit an artery. So there's a lot of patient stress. Obviously, you can have a patient that seems stable one moment, and the next moment they're in anaphylactic shock or having life-threatening angioedema where they can't breathe. So there's those kinds of stresses in the emergency department. There's also stresses that relate to burnout. So starting to feel cynical, starting to feel detached from your patients or from the people that you work with. But the thing that really led me into mindfulness were not any of these stressors, but the stressors that come from these two people. So these are my children. This is Michaela and Matthew. Michaela is 7. They're younger in this picture, and Matthew is 5 and a half. Have to get the half in. When my husband and I decided to become parents, we knew about the lack of sleep, we knew about financial stressors, we knew about all those types of things, but what no one really ever talked to me about was the emotional component of raising children. And, especially when they start having opinions and they start talking back to you and they push every button that they possibly can to you and to each other and to your spouse. And so I often found myself like this. Especially like I said, being impatient or kind of being on task is great in the emergency department, not so good with toddlers. And so I was like, come on, get your clothes on, and finding myself being the kind of parent a lot of times I wasn't proud of being. And so in combination with, dealing with 17 some years in medicine, dealing with children, especially kind of later in life when I kind of settled into my groove, I decided that, I needed to kind of find a better way of dealing with things. So what's the answer? So you could change the system. So whether you talk about your family or you talk about something like healthcare, change is good, it's necessary, but it takes time. So if you think about, changing a system in a hospital, yes, you can work on efficiency, you can work on staffing, you can work on flow, and that's great, and it should be done, but it takes time. Obviously with children, 18 years minimum, a lot of people who are more advanced parents, probably more than that. So finite resources. So if I was Tom Brady and Giselle, how do you say their name? I'd have 2 nannies and a chef and someone to mow the yard and, have all these resources to help me with parenting. Or if we could have, a nurse for every 2 rooms or, as many physicians or techs that we need to make things work in the hospital. But we have finite resources. We have to deal with what we deal with. Education is challenging, so you can try to come up with a new system, but getting people to adopt it can take time. Same again with families, changing how you do things and flow all takes time and challenge. People are who they are. I think we all deal with difficult personalities. Sometimes we're difficult ourselves. And no system will ever be perfect. So obviously, these are important aspects to change and making things better, but you really kind of have to take things into your own hands. So there's one way to do it, and the little caption says, hey, I feel better already. So Institute for the Study of Emotional Stress. Or there's got to be a better way to deal with it. Instead of, choosing anger, choosing change of yourself. And so this is a quote from Viktor Frankl: "Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way." So he's a neurologist. He survived Auschwitz, and he talks a lot about your ability to control how you react to things. One of the things that I'll talk a little bit later about is he speaks about there being a stimulus and then there being a response. And in between the stimulus and a response is a space. And in that space is when you get to choose. And that's the space that gives you power and freedom to decide who you're going to be. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about what exactly is mindfulness then. So to understand mindfulness, let's talk about what we're like right now. So often our minds are more in the future or in the past than in the present. So, you're taking your kids to school and you're thinking about what you're going to have for dinner. Or you're looking back that you didn't put the laundry in the dryer. You're kind of always focused on something else and what's happening right now. So we are often on autopilot, reacting mechanically, not fully aware of what we're doing and experiencing. And some of that's important, like when you're driving to work, if you had to think about every single turn, it would take you a lot of brain power to do the basics of life. But if you're functioning on autopilot when you're dealing, let's say, I use a lot of my own examples, when I'm dealing with a patient with chest pain. I've seen thousands of people with chest pain. I'm like going through the differential in my head, but not really paying attention to a human being in front of me. So a lot of times we just go on autopilot. Too much of our energy is expended on anticipating, fantasizing, planning, and clinging to memories. So, you think, oh, what's that? What are these people in this room going to think about me? And you're not in the present moment. So our minds are too busy. And I love this picture because I think that kind of puts it, in a lot of perspective. So mindful or mindful. And yes, I would like to be more like the dog at times. So, all right. So mindfulness, then is to live in the moment. So it's observing what your mind is doing from moment to moment. So it's not emptying your mind, it's being aware of what's going on in your mind. So having that awareness of what's happening now without judgment, commentary, or decision. So if I'm feeling angry with my kids, I realize I'm feeling angry and maybe choosing to respond differently. So having awareness of what's going on in your mind. Watching your thoughts without getting caught up with them. So, you're thinking, oh, I'm planning dinner instead of playing with my children. Oh, I have to do all this stuff. I'm thinking about all these things. So, just being aware of what's going on in the background of your mind at all times. And then learning how to make room for new ways of seeing old problems and learning awareness of the interconnectedness of things. We'll talk about that a little bit more in the science part. So why bother? Why practice mindfulness? So obviously we talked about, mindfulness being a healthy way to manage stress and to improve well-being. And again, you'll understand more as we go through the talk. Hostility. So a lot of people find themselves feeling hostile, like I said, whether it's with children or, with patients that kind of just get under your skin or clients or people that you work with or coworkers. So that trait, there are multiple studies that have clearly linked the trait of hostility with early death from heart attack, cancer, and multiple other conditions. So a reason to not feel hostile. So those habitual and automatic reactions that autopilot lead to increased stress and lead you away from your authentic self. So you also want to build stronger relationships with people. Humans are, we are a species that needs to interact with other humans. And we are healthiest and happiest when we are connected and interact with people. So building stronger relationships is fundamental to overall happiness and well-being. And then again, to restore that human connection, especially nowadays with all the screens, everybody's so detached. How often are we really looking at each other and really kind of taking the other person in and being in the moment? So let's talk about stress. You hear a lot about stress, and stress is kind of fascinating. So it is the relationship that a person has with their environment, and they feel if they're a negative stress that environment is overwhelming their resources. So it's too much for them to deal with. It's our reactions, though, to the stressors, especially when we react habitually, again, on autopilot or maladaptively, big word, that it causes us to determine how much stress we actually feel and what type of stress. So it's not the stressor itself necessarily, but how it's perceived and handled that will determine whether or not it leads to that negative stress. So there's this really interesting study that was done by a doctor named Kelly McGonigal. And so they did research on 30,000 people over a period of 8 years. And what they did is they had these people fill out these very detailed surveys measuring their level of stress. 8 years later, they went back into records to see who died. Very uplifting study. So what they found is that those who described themselves as having a high level of stress had a 47% increased risk of death compared to other people. But this was true for the people that only reported that they believed that the stress was bad for their health. The people that actually had the lowest risk of death were the people that had the highest level of stress, but actually believed, again, perceived that that stress was not harmful for them. So they thought of their heart pounding, that rapid breathing, the sweating, as their body preparing to take on a challenge. So stress became courage. So to me, that's such a powerful study that what you believe will actually affect your health. In this study, if you take it a level further, they actually did studies on these folks, not all 30,000, but they looked at the people who thought stress was bad for them and the people that thought stress was leading to courage. The people that thought stress was bad, when they were stressed, actually had narrowing of their coronary arteries. So the arteries of their heart, when they were stressed, became smaller. So there was less blood flow to the heart. The people that thought that the stress was good for them actually had dilation or opening of the arteries, giving more blood flow to the heart. So there was actually a physiologic effect of what they believed about their stress. So combating stress with mindfulness. So mindfulness, again, being in the moment, allows you to see what's happening right now, choose, how you're going to react to it. And John Kabat-Zinn, I just put this quote up there from his book. He's kind of the pioneer, the man who really founded mindfulness. He's up at University of Massachusetts. So again, it's being conscious of your options in stressful situations and looking at, like, is this an effective response or not? And then that exerts influence over whether you experience stress and whether it will lead to distress and over time disease. So I like to tell a story about how when I got into mindfulness and doing it with my family, one of the times I used it in the emergency department. After you have kids, at least for me, after I had children, dealing with sick and very injured children was much more stressful because you really can take on what the families are going through. So I came into work, it was a 6 a.m. shift. And we got a call from EMS that there was a like 30-some-day-old baby that was in cardiac arrest, and they were on their way in. And so obviously we get the team together, we're getting everybody in the room. And this is when I was, like I said, really into the mindfulness, and I looked around the room, made sure everybody knew what their roles were, of course, the medical part of it, but then said, we're all very experienced. We come here with great skill and knowledge, and we're going to do the best that we can for this child and give it everything we've got. We coded the child and we were not able to resuscitate the child, so the child did pass. And at the end, we gathered at the end of the room and had a moment of silence and, had thoughts for this child and for ourselves. And honestly, it was like one of the best codes that I've run and been through, because we really kind of had that moment at the beginning, at the end, that gave us closure and took away some of the pain. It's never goes away, but was much better than a lot of the other ones where you just go in and leave. So you can really be mindful even in those stressful situations and share that with others. So just to wrap up about mindfulness, so non-judging, so looking at those thoughts without feeling badly about them happening, being patient with yourself, because this is a whole new way of looking at your mind, having a beginner's mind, so being open to the fact that you're going to have times when you stumble and fail, and that's okay. Trusting that the process will lead to more openness, non-striving, so you're not like, I have a goal of being as mindful as I can by 1 month, it's just kind of seeing where this takes you, accepting what you learn about yourself and not judging yourself for that, and then letting go of that which is not useful for you. So we are going to do a 1-minute mindfulness meditation. So I'm going to talk about this, and then I'm going to sit down with you guys. Well, actually, I'll sit over here and do this meditation. So, and then I'll explain let me go through it and then I'll explain what the whole point is. So you sit up straight with your spine self-supporting. You don't have to close your eyes just yet. Feet on the floor and then close your eyes. Focus your attention on your breath as it flows in and out. So just kind of what it feels like in your nose, your mouth. If you're a mouth breather, there's no like hold your breath, do it for 6 seconds. It's not deep breathing, just your normal breath. And just kind of feeling what your lungs feel like, what your nose feels like, what your body feels like as oxygen is going in and out. After a while, for me in the beginning, it took about 2 seconds. Your mind starts to wander. And when that happens, you just kind of gently bring yourself back to the attention of breathing. So again, think of this as like practice for when, again, my example, you're in the room with the patient with chest pain, you're like, yeah, I've heard this before. And you find your mind drifting away from that patient into the differential diagnosis to then bring it back to that patient, or with your kids or your spouse or whoever it is that you interact with, and you find your mind drifting, gently bring it back without judgment. And then just let whatever happens, happen. So there's no right or wrong in this. It's really just kind of paying attention to yourself, sometimes for the first time ever. And then after a minute, just let your eyes open. And so you can do this anytime. So I'm gonna let you guys straighten up, and I've got my little phone timer, and I want you guys, everybody, to try this for just a minute. So again, sit down, close your eyes, and just focus on your breathing. Okay. So I cheated. So I was like, wait, did I start it? A minute feels like a lot longer when you're sitting in a room with people. So that's just kind of a brief introduction into one of the meditative practices for mindfulness. There are lots of different apps. I think HealthWorks has some availability of different apps to practice mindfulness, but you can do this anytime. So here's some other tools that you can use. ARC, I use this one a lot. And this is kind of in that space in between the stimulus and the response. So you acknowledge what's happening and accept it. Reflect on your choices and what you feel like you can do or don't want to do, what works in the past or what hasn't worked. And then you can choose and change how you adapt to what's going on and how you're going to react to it. So I do this with my kids a lot. So if I'm getting like worked up about something, I feel that I am, and then acknowledge and accept it, realize that's not what I want to be, and then change and come up with a different behavior. Oops. It's been another minute. Shush. Okay, sorry. All right, another one, blend and deflect. So this is to acknowledge and reiterate the other person's concerns and validate them. Admittedly, I use this a lot with the dreaded man cold when it comes into urgent care. Women get the man cold too, just so you know. It's not sexist in any way. But when people come in and they've had a runny nose, and it's like, really, you're here? You know, that's your first, or sometimes my first response. And then I just like, wow, this person may be scared that they have this life-threatening flu. Or they're worried about their kid who has a fever and they have heard about all these deaths. So you acknowledge and reiterate their concerns, and then, hey, your vital signs are stable. I think you've got a cold. Antibiotics can cause really bad side effects. And if you take ibuprofen and rest and let your body heal up, you're gonna start feeling a lot better. And so giving them, not just kind of trying to blow them off, but really trying to understand, blend with them, and then kind of lead them down a path to a positive outcome. Pause, presence, proceed. So this is kind of like what I did with the code, and this does come from medical literature. So pause before the patient interaction, consciously put aside distracting thoughts and prepare. Presence is to be fully engaged. So again, being present there. and then to proceed to addressing the situation. One of the other ways to do this is something called 2 feet, 1 breath. So when you're standing outside of a room or before you're supposed to have an interaction, putting both feet on the floor, kind of feeling the ground underneath you, taking a deep breath to, again, make sure you're present, and then going into the interaction. So just taking that moment to realize that you're engaging with another human being. All right, mindful feedback, biofeedback. We can all do this together really quickly. No one has to do anything crazy. So as you're going through these, like, think about how this actually makes you feel in your body. Because there's actually data that when you change your body, you change your mind. The vagus nerve communicates with the brain, and so if you can relax your body, it actually helps your mind. So the first one is simply to smile. So everybody smile. We're here doing a lecture. Everybody's smiling good. Not a fake smile, real smile. Stand up straight. Stand up, everybody. We've been sitting down. Stand up straight and open your chest. So just pulling your shoulders back, having a good posture, having your spine be straight. And so that increases feelings of self-awareness as well as self-confidence. Okay, you can sit back down. You can take a deep breath. So this is actually taking in a deep breath. So usually in through your nose. Hold it for a second, and then out. So again, just kind of calming, centering, calming your face. I often find myself doing this. This is called your corrugator supercilii, this little muscle right here that you get this like Botoxable wedge. And so calming your face helps you actually feel more calm. And then the last one is to loosen your jaw. So just kind of like loosen your jaw and wiggle it around a little bit. It always makes me yawn. I don't know. Some people yawn, but that's also another way. So if you're feeling tight, just think of some of these little quick biofeedback things that you can do to help you relax. All right. Any questions or any discussion about mindfulness? You guys can talk or come go. It's not formal. So, yeah. All right. So we're going to talk about the science of happiness. All right. So what is happiness? This is a question I don't think we ask very often. So if you look at what's called simple hedonic theory, the quality of life equals the quality of good moments minus the quality of the bad moments. So we want as many and as good moments and as few bad moments as possible. A lot of people live like this, but it's really a delusion. It's not true happiness. So when you look at what science defines happiness as, the experience of positive emotions, pleasure combined with deep feelings of meaning and purpose. So it's not having the car or the house or the job or the vacation. I think this is why Facebook or other social media can often make people really feel bad about themselves, because you're looking at everybody's happiness. But happiness is actually living a life that you feel is good and worthwhile, and it gives you a sense of deep satisfaction. So that's the happiness we're talking about here. So happiness in your genes. So there was a landmark study done by a researcher in California, Sandra Limbrowski, that looked at how much of happiness is actually genetic, that you're born with. And they did this doing studies on twins, which is how they figured this out. So they found that 50% of happiness is genetic. So as we get into the neuroscience a little bit, you'll understand that there's different brain circuits that tend to make people more stressed or more happy, different social circuits, we'll talk about that. So about 50% is what you're given. Only about 10% is environmental. I always thought it would be a lot higher than that. So that's your circumstances, what's going on around you. So you're talking about the kid in India that lives in a shanty. When the studies are showing that only 10% of their environment actually contributes to their that deeper sense of happiness. So that means 40% is under your power to control. So I found that really powerful, that you have significant influence on how you feel in your life. So I want to be that guy, not in hell, but says, we're just not reaching that guy, right? So he is obviously, doing his job, he's happy, doesn't care that, Satan is kind of hanging out with him there. But, just kind of like not being affected as much by your external environment and choosing to go for that happiness. So we're going to talk about neurotransmitters, the prefrontal cortex, which is the thinking brain, the limbic system, which is the feeling brain, and the connected parts, which have to do with habits, enjoyment, addictions, and impulsive behavior. This is obviously very complicated, so I'm going to try to make it pretty simple. And the reason I talk about this, I think to me it made a lot more sense when I understood my brain as far as the choices that I made to change it. And so hopefully that will work for you guys as well. So there's a lot of neurotransmitters. I'm only going to talk about 3 of them. One is serotonin. This improves willpower, motivation, but especially mood. Norepinephrine, that enhances thinking, focus, and your ability to deal with stress. Dopamine, you probably all heard of at least serotonin and dopamine. This increases enjoyment. It's necessary for changing bad habits. I'm going to focus on dopamine in a little bit, so we'll go into that one in a little more detail. So the parts of your brain that have to do with thought and ultimately happiness and choice, your prefrontal cortex, so that's the thinking brain. It is the whole surface of the front third of the brain. I'll show you a picture in a second. It's the most evolved part, so it gives us advantages to be able to, invent, build societies, et cetera, et cetera. But it's also responsible for worrying, guilt, shame, problems with thinking clearly, and indecisiveness. So this is the part of the brain that thinks about your feelings. And there it is. Please ignore the amygdala. It's so it's not supposed to be there. Anyway, so it's that front third of the brain. There are different parts of it that, again, they've done so much research on how they deal with personality, but I won't get into that. And the limbic system. So this is your feeling brain. So this is the part that feels emotions. So this is a deeper, more privative area of the brain that's responsible for things like excitement, fear, anxiety, memory, and desire. There are 4 regions: the hypothalamus, the amygdala, the hippocampus, and the cingulate cortex. All right, so the hypothalamus, this is the part that regulates a bunch of hormones, things like cortisol and stress hormones. And so this is your flight or fight response comes from here. And so that's this area that has to deal with that actual stress response. So finding ways to calm that down can help reduce stress. The amygdala is the area of the brain that's very closely connected to the hypothalamus, which is, again, stress. And this part of the brain has to do with anxiety, fear, and negative emotions. The hippocampus, so this is responsible for logging memory. This always makes me think of that movie Inside Out. I don't know if you all saw that, but so it really likes emotional memories. And then it's connected to what's called the cingulate cortex. And this is the part that determines kind of what you're paying attention to. So the cingulate cortex is the screen. If your brain is the computer with all the data, the cingulate cortex is the part that you're actually seeing. And so it's a gateway between the emotional brain and the thinking brain. And the anterior cingulate in particular, and some people have an overactive anterior cingulate, notices the mistakes that you make, which is good in the sense that you can then change them, but can be very bad if you're always noticing what you do wrong. So there's some of those structures: the hypothalamus up top there, the amygdala in the middle, hippocampus, and then that blue you can see is right connected to the thinking brain, is the part that helps you determine what you're paying attention to. And then really quickly, the connected parts. So there's something called the striatum, and that has to do with habits, enjoyment, and addiction. So the dorsal striatum is the brain's habit circuit. So this part of the brain does not care if a habit is good or bad. All it does is, if you do things repetitively, it gives you a shortcut so you don't have to think about it. So whether that's exercising, or whether that's drinking alcohol, or any of those other good or bad habits, they get programmed into the dorsal striatum. Once they're there, they don't go away. And so you can't get rid of them, but you can make some of them stronger and weaker by the choices you make. So I have a whole talk about habits, which is a lot of fun too. The nucleus accumbens is the partier of the brain. So it's impulsive behavior. So if you eat a pint of ice cream, or you go out and have like 7 beers with your friends, so it makes you do kind of impulsive things. And dopamine, again, that neurotransmitter we're going to talk about more, is released here when you do anything fun or exciting. So then you can see the little round circle there is the nucleus accumbens. That's a little part of your guy. And the red is the striatum. The dorsal is the one, kind of just the top part of it is the one that has to do with your habits. So it's this giant brain and these little parts that like make you do stuff that you otherwise maybe would or would not do. All right. So people, basically, that whole genetic component of happiness, you end up having different tuning or different circuits in your brain that kind of help you determine what kind of responses you're going to have. So different people have different activity and reactivity of these circuits. So things like, your social circuit, like how you deal with people, or your decision-making circuit, or your habit circuit. There's dozens of them. And so these are influenced by genetics, but also early childhood experiences, current life stress, social support. So these can be influenced throughout your life. You have kind of a baseline, and then you build on it as a child, and then what's going on around you helps influence that. So I like to give an example of, for me, my social circuit. So I was born in India. My parents, I immigrated when I was a baby, but my parents are from India, and they are part of an extended family. And in India, we're just, in my experience, my parents didn't really have friends. It was all family, and when you had friends, it was like, we have to impress our friends. And so we would have, for example, dinner parties. And my mom would spend like 3 weeks making food for like 10 people. And it would have this massive spread of food and, like enough for like 3 times that number. And she would be like, everything had to be perfect, the house had to be immaculate, everything had to be ready on time, heated up at the exact right moment. And we did this like on a regular basis. And then people would come and they'd be like, that's amazing, you did so much work. And she's like, no, I didn't do anything. It was simple. And it was like all this like very stressful thing about like when you hung out with people, it had to be this intense, like perfect celebration. And so I grew up with that. And so for a long time when I was around people, I kind of was like, is this what friendship is? So we'll talk about a little bit more about that later, but that's kind of an example of a circuit of what my social circuit used to be like. So dopamine, this is the neurotransmitter responsible for motivation, productivity, and focus. It enables resisting impulses, so it's important. It also is linked to enjoyment and pleasure, and it's the brain's reward system. But low levels can lead to a lack of motivation, fatigue, addictive behaviors, and mood swings. So some people have genetically lower dopamine. Some people go back and forth because of addictive behaviors, kind of like they have a spike and then drop down low. So dopamine, you actually want to increase dopamine. Your brain is kind of geared towards doing that to get to the level that the brain needs. So dopamine is released when any action is taken that would increase survival. So that's eating, sex, if you have resources, you get money or you buy something that you think contributes to your survival on a primitive level, dopamine's increased. Drugs also increase dopamine. So nicotine, about 200% increase in dopamine when you smoke. Cocaine, about 400%. Amphetamines is about 1,000%. So you can see how these drugs can lead to the brain to just wanting more dopamine. So obviously any of those things, whether it's food, sex, buying stuff, drugs, can lead to abuse and addiction. So we don't want to increase dopamine in those ways, obviously, right? So we want to increase dopamine in healthy ways. So one of the other ways to increase dopamine is to use your thinking brain, to activate the prefrontal cortex. That actually, in and of itself, increases dopamine. And so we're going to talk about some ways that you can do that. And this ties into mindfulness. So if you remember, mindfulness is yes to be present, but it's also listening to what's going on in your brain and making choices. We all have choices in that space that we can make. So notice what you notice. So start noticing your biases. When I was getting somewhat burnt out in emergency medicine, I noticed that when I saw someone that was here to get narcotics, I was like, oh, really? I had not seen the patient. I didn't know anything about them, but I had this like almost, visceral response of like, okay, I'm gonna have to deal with this person that's gonna give me a hard time. And so I was like, when I got into the mindfulness thing, I was like, whoa, I'm kind of judging people before I even really interact with them. And this is so important. I didn't beat myself up for that. It's non-judgmental awareness of simply noticing without reacting emotionally. So if I got all like, oh my God, I'm a bad doctor, my little amygdala would be all unhappy. So this goes into brain science as well. You're going to trigger those emotional parts of your brain if you act emotionally. It's okay to notice that you're not doing something great and then decide you want to become better. And so again, they're noticing a mistake will trigger the emotional amygdala, and then if you activate your prefrontal cortex, think about it, it actually calms that emotional part of yourself down. So notice what you notice what your biases are, and see if they're valid and if they contribute to your overall happiness. So go for good enough. So when I talked about my social circuits, obviously good enough was the best for in my upbringing. But then I, realized that, I don't have to be perfect. I'm just gonna have my friends over, we're gonna order pizza. There's gonna be dog hair on the floor because I have two dogs that shed and I'm 12 years old and I have kids. And there's probably gonna be some Legos and cars laying around, and that's okay. And so, wanting to be perfect or wanting to maximize has been proven to increase depression and anxiety. Again, going back to like the social media, when people look at that and they're like, my life isn't like this, how come I'm not in Jamaica? So if you want to be awesome all the time, you're probably not gonna ever find peace and happiness. So pay attention to what you can control. Feeling in control reduces anxiety, worrying, and even pain. And so these effects are mediated again by the thinking brain, that prefrontal cortex, and strengthening that brain, as I've been saying, can help combat negative emotions. So pay more attention to what is under your control. So let's say you've got some financial things going on. I don't know, you have no control over what your tax rate is or whatever, but you have control over how much you eat out, or how much you're gonna spend on frivolous things. Or I do this when I'm driving, because people can really get on my nerves when I'm driving. Why are you going slow in the fast lane? So I pay attention to what I can do. And I also try to have some empathy, because I don't know what's going on in that person who's in that car. Are they speeding, or did they just cut me off because their kid's sick or something else? So, so pay attention to what you can control, and that will help decrease anxiety as well. So if we talk about exercise, there's so much data about exercise. And I know in my own life, exercising regularly is just so valuable. And you talk about it like, come on, go exercise, but exercise is a choice that you have to make every single day. And for some people it's easier, and for some people it's super hard, especially if you haven't done it in a while. And I've been there. I've totally not exercised for a while, and I have smaller genetics, but I have been out of breath, like chasing my kids, because I didn't make that, give that commitment to myself. But when I do, I'm much happier, and there's a lot of science behind it. So increases energy and vitality, improves sleep, improves appetite, improves mood, it boosts your self-esteem, it decreases isolation. Again, being social is so important to happiness. So being out with other people, even if you're just on the street, you're not interacting with someone, you're still out and about in the world. So the neuroscience of exercise, so it increases something called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is like steroids for the brain. So it actually helps grow new brain cells. So there's a lot of data about the fact, you've always heard, oh, you only have so many brain cells. That doesn't seem to be true. It seems that you can actually grow more brain cells. Boosts serotonin, so again, positive mood, norepinephrine, focus, dopamine, we heard about dopamine. Endorphins, those are your body's natural substance that helps combat pain. Reduces stress hormones like cortisol, which again are very bad for you physiologically. And again, increases blood flow to that prefrontal cortex, so to that thinking brain. So here's some tips to encourage exercise. So have fun. It doesn't have to be that you go to the gym and, or go to CrossFit and feel like you're gonna die, or that you're gonna lose an arm by the end of the class. You could play Frisbee. You could, go outside and, bike with your kids. You can go sledding in the winter. So whatever it is that's fun for you, that if it's active, it's exercise. Do it with someone else. So this is, it gives you accountability. If you are telling someone else you're going to, hey, I'll meet you at the 6 a.m. yoga class. I did that once. Not 6 a.m., not my thing. And it also helps that social part of happiness. Commit to a brief trial period, especially if you haven't exercised for a while. Okay, for 2 weeks, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, I'm going to do X. And commit to that. Even if you just go and do it for like 5 minutes, you put your gym clothes on, you lift a little bit, you've done it, you've made a step. So commit to a brief trial period. Enjoy the view. So studies have shown if you exercise in pleasant environments, the benefits of exercise are actually boosted and you're more likely to do it. We're fortunate to have a bunch of nice walking trails and things like that around here. Or if you're a city person, the way the city is kind of grown in Lynchburg is somewhere fun to go do things. Think about what's important to you. So for me, it's like, I had my kids older in life, and so I'm like, I want to be able to play with my grandkids, and I'm going to be in my 70s, maybe, when I have kids. And so it's important for me to stay healthy and be able to be active, and that focusing on that helps you get over that real painful, especially the first couple of weeks when you haven't been exercising for a while. Exercise before you reward yourself. So we're probably all going to have ice cream or watch TV or look at Facebook. So do a quick 10-minute workout before you do that exercise. There's something on YouTube called fitnessblender.com, and they're free exercise videos, and they have, they're nice people with normal music, and they have ways you can do it whether that's easy and hard. So do a quick 10-minute ab workout or something, and then reward yourself. It makes it more pleasant. Keep an exercise plan. So writing things down, this helps me a lot. I write them down and I cross them off. And so that activates the prefrontal cortex. Jerry Seinfeld did this. It was called Don't Break the Chain when he did it. So he wanted to practice different routines. So he put this big calendar up on his wall, and every day he did it, he put a big X on it. And the point was, don't break that chain, keep that X going. And it's very rewarding to cross something off of a list. And it gets your brain active too, your thinking brain. All right, so set tangible goals, so make good decisions, not the best decision. You can sabotage yourself if you're telling yourself you have to go run a marathon, for exercise. Say I'm gonna exercise Monday, Wednesday, Friday for a couple weeks. Take a step in the right direction. So let's say, your desk is a mess, and you're like, I'm gonna clean my desk, and you're gonna do it on Friday, and you get to Friday, and you're like, I don't wanna clean my desk. Just do one thing. If it's too much to do the whole thing, put a few things away, and at least you've taken a step in the right direction. Decide for something you want, not something you don't want. So, I'm going to have a good day at work today, I'm not going to have a bad day. So think of it positively. And then set specific long-term goals. So let's say you want to spend more time with your children. Don't just say, I'm going to spend more time with my children. Just say, we're going to do board games every Friday night. So have a specific goal that you can identify. Reduce stress. So again, stress biases the brain towards habits as opposed to intentional actions. So again, exercise, sleep, biofeedback. We'll talk about gratitude in a minute, social interactions, and accept that you won't be perfect. Serotonin is that other neurotransmitter, some things that increase that. This helps with mood. So sunlight, vitamin D helps in the production of serotonin. Massage, yes. There's a study, serotonin can be increased by up to 30% from getting a massage, so please get a massage. Exercise. Remembering happy memories will increase serotonin and that anterior cingulate, which is that part that notices your mistakes. So it actually will make you more prone towards positive as opposed to negative. Again, the prefrontal cortex. Think about how life would improve. So, if I stopped drinking, I would, feel better and be able to interact with my family. Or if I lost, 20 pounds, I could, fit into the bathing suit, or whatever it is that you think would make your life improve. And then again, being aware of your emotions. Oh, we're at this part, okay. So that's just a quick neuroscience of happiness. I hope that it makes sense how it ties in with mindfulness. I started with my kids, I'm gonna end with my kids because I like to talk about them, they're a lot of fun. And I'm gonna talk about some specific things that, again, this is all data proven, research proven measures you can take, and this is increasing your enjoyment at work. And so this is Michaela. Michaela is very sensitive. She doesn't like bruises on apples and banana. She's squeamish in every way possible. But when it comes to her teeth falling out, she'll wiggle them and wiggle them and wiggle them, and they fall out in this bloody mess. And she's like, yay, I lost a tooth. So who can guess why Michaela says, yay, I lost a tooth?
Money.
Yes, the tooth fairy, money, yeah. So, she's looking at this in a negative thing in a very positive way. And so this is positive self-directed framing. I think about this sometimes when you're dealing with things that, part of you is like, I don't want to deal with that nasty person, or I don't want to deal with patient satisfaction or whatever it is that you think can bring your work life down. If you put it in a positive self-directed way, it can really change how you feel about it. So try to think of one thing you've done that's made a patient, visitor, client, or colleague delighted in the past. So just while you're sitting there, think of one thing. What did you do differently to make that person feel valued and cared for? And what would it take for you to do this more often? I know for me, it's because it felt really good, because I really helped that person. I made a difference in their life. And I think if you go into the workplace kind of thinking that way, as opposed to I have to do this or I'm going to get in trouble, think of it in a way that you control, and setting a toward goal. I'm going to have a better day because I'm going to try to do X more often with my patients or colleagues. So again, why bother with other people's happiness. So one of the best ways to make yourself happy is to make other people happy. That's been, again, proven through data over and over again. One of the best ways to make other people happy is to be happy yourself. So it's a cycle and that we all influence each other, and I think that nowadays it's really easy to forget that. Okay, so the next example, this is Michaela and Matthew. I'm telling them to get into their car seats because we have to go. They have to buckle themselves up, and they are giggling and laughing and looking at their bikes in the car, and they won't do anything. And I know that I'm like, this is your job, guys. You gotta get yourself in. And I'm getting angry and starting to yell at them, but then I'm like, oh, let's do the 10 count. Let's see who can buckle themselves in the car seat before I count to 10. Suddenly they've turned back around, they're smiling, and they're buckling themselves up in. And they usually get to about 7 or 8 and it's done. So this is an example of flow. So flow is also been studied. So this is a satisfaction that comes with being totally immersed and concentrating on what is being done in the present. So flow occurs in different ways. So if you have a high challenge task and you have someone with low skill, you have anxiety. If you have a low challenge task and someone with high skill, you have boredom. So flow comes when the challenge and the skill match up, or the challenge is just above the person's skill level. And so, you know, what you're trying to do is increase flow at work. So the first question is like, can you even have flow at work? Or is this something that happens when I'm doing a hobby or something I enjoy doing? Well, they did some studies, and flow producing situations occurred more than 3 times more often when people were working as opposed to during leisure time. And this was at all levels. So this was whether it was managers, clerks, blue collar workers. And so flow actually happens more at work. And there's ways that you can create it. So identify moments of engagement and satisfaction on the job, which may be those things that you did to make other people happy, or you know, looking at, you know, in urgent care, we're seeing a ton of people with flu, just being like, wow, we're really making a difference in the community. So again, talking about your work in terms of challenge and engagement, not in terms of boredom and drudgery. You know, let's see if we can get these people in and out of here in under an hour. So increasing challenge and skill in tasks that don't ordinarily result in flow. So if you have to document something on the computer, try to get as few clicks as possible. Put a little game in it. Or if someone's filing, see how quickly you can get those files done. Not because you're trying to meet some other external goal, but you're actually trying to check things off. I know when I exercise, I like intervals. Like I like to do like a quick interval and then slow down. And I feel like I've checked something off my list. So you can do flow to increase your enjoyment at work. Also use mindfulness. So I kind of think of like someone who may work in a cafeteria that's checking people out, and just like, instead of just taking their money, you know, notice the food that's on their plate, notice what the person's wearing, notice the smell, notice kind of the emotions they may carry on their face. So bring yourself into that moment, and that decreases that drudgery of work. Okay, finally, we're doing okay, we're okay. So in this little context, so we were at a friend's house, the kids were playing outside the swimming pool, Michaela got really hot, she wanted to do the seesaw, she was sitting in the corner bawling on the seesaw because no one would play with her. Her brother normally never pays attention to anything like this because he's in his own little world, but he happened to notice it. He stopped his fun little play in the pool and he went over into the seesaw with Michaela. And so this was a random act of kindness from my son, because like I said, he's usually trapped in his own little world of little boyhood. So practice and acknowledge random acts of kindness. So write down a note whenever you do something kind. This is, again, think of this at work. Tally your daily totals. How do they make you feel? And then do it at the beginning of the week and see what's happened kind of at the end of the week. And this, again, is based on a research study. And of course, those numbers increased over a week because practicing acts of kindness invariably make us all feel good. And again, it's part of that connectedness with each other. So if you help others and make them have a better day, you'll probably have a better day yourself. Lastly, so this happened, I came home from a long day of work. The kids were supposed to be in bed, but instead every toy that they had was downstairs. They were crazy, and you know, you would think I'd be frustrated, but I used this picture to open up the last story that I like to tell from the emergency department. I can't say I like to tell it, but it kind of drives a point home. So I was 7 months pregnant with Matthew, And Michaela was 18 months old, and I was working in the emergency department, and I called my husband in the back to see how things were going. He's like, yeah, we're finishing up at Kroger, we're gonna leave in about 5 minutes, and we'll see you when you get home. I was like, okay, great. Well, maybe about 5-ish minutes later, we get a call from the EMS that an 18-month-old was run over by a car. And so I immediately ran to the back and called my husband. Each ring kind of like, please pick up, and he was like, what's up? And I'm like, are you guys okay? And he was like, yeah, and I was like, okay. So obviously it wasn't my child, but that child came in and did not make it. And so when you see that over and over again, the thing that those stories lead me to is gratitude. I don't know why that's up there, sorry. So gratitude is something that we should all have. There's a study by those people, Amos and McCullough, the 3 gratitudes. So they did a study of people writing down 3 things, took less than 2 minutes at the end of every workday for a period of 3 weeks. And they actually saw that their brains became more positive, or more wired to look for positive, just by being grateful at the end of each day. I use these words a lot, get to. Anytime you hear a story like the one I just told you, or a friend that's struggling with cancer, or losing a child or a parent, I get to deal with these difficult situations. I get to deal with my crazy kids at bedtime. I get to go to work, and I'm not on the other side in the bed. So please remember gratitude. Numerous studies have shown that gratitude will really increase your happiness and your health. All right, at the end of the day, 3 blessings and why. At the end of each workday, stop for a few moments and reflect. Consider all the positive things that happened, big or small. Choose 3 things that blessed your day, write them down, ask why they happened, and go to gratitude and appreciation. So I'm going to end by saying that practice is important. None of this is easy. I do it all the time. You will always kind of be working on yourself. It's not like I'm mindful 100% of the time, but when I'm not, I learn from those moments and I try to be better the next time. So it's like a constant process. I'm going to end with there's an old Cherokee tale of 2 wolves. That each person has inside of them. One is the wolf of sorrow and fear and self-pity and anger and resentment, and the other is the wolf of joy and peace and hope and truth. And which wolf becomes stronger? And of course, the answer is the one you feed. So I'm going to end with that. I appreciate everybody's time. I hope you take something away from this, and that's it. Any questions or anything? All right, thank you all.